I have never witnessed an abuse of the power of the chair, as we saw this at the last action here, to refuse to recognize a sitting member of the committee, to ignore them. And I've had the opportunity, and I consider it a real opportunity, to testify in Congress, testify in 40-plus states before their legislative bodies. Not once have I ever seen this type of abuse, absolute outright fabrication of the truth. Drazkowski, Perry, Downey need to go back and understand the word truth, because their truth is lies.
These folks, the majority of this committee, decided to protect the richest Minnesotans and to attack hardworking state employees who do Minnesota's work every single day to make this state the great state it is. They deserve the thanks of this committee. They deserve the 2% from this committee. They deserve to be revered by this committee. They do not deserve the treatment they got today.
We'll call the Subcommittee on Employee Relations to order on this, the 30th of August 2012. We'll go right to the agenda and make a review of the minutes from August 9th, 2012 meeting. If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve.
Move approval, Mr. Chair.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Let's take a look at, if we could have Commissioner Showalter come forward. Ms. Holmes. Next on the agenda is the overview of the workforce report from 2011. And before we get started here, you might notice that they removed the CGIP dependent audit report off the agenda due to pending litigation. Correct, Ms. Holmes? We just felt that it was not the right time to go through that audit.
That's correct.
And I would make it known that I have received, matter of fact, I have one from me with me today, but I have been receiving some information from state employees who feel that through the audit that there were some mistakes. They feel that they were wrong. If there are further, feel free to forward them to my office. And I'll be in contact with the Commissioner and we'll try to get to the bottom of it. I can see where there have been some miscommunications during that audit, but we want to make sure that if there are those out there that might have been kicked off or had it been kicked off for some reason, that we try to reinstate them as soon as we can. So that's an offer that I'll make through my office to work with them. So with that being said, let's move forward. If you could give us an overview of the workforce report. Commissioner Showalter, you're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members. For the record, my name is Jim Showalter, Commissioner of Minnesota Management Budget. The SER has asked for a brief presentation about two reports that have been previously issued by MMB. The first one is a workforce report, taking a look at a number of facts and figures describing the Minnesota workforce and components of it. The second is a FTE report that was issued this summer and is updated on a regular basis on our website. I think both of them combined give you a lot more information and detail about the state workforce. But really, to talk about the state workforce as an entity is missing the subtleties. There are a number of trends, number of changes, number of subcomponents on it that require the attention of the executive branch constantly, and I think the legislature and the SCR as you consider the contracts before you. One of the takeaways that I take from this is simply that the workforce is changing, that the demographic changes that we are experiencing are real and profound, and that the state as an employer cannot assume that the workforce that it has had in the past, the quality workforce and the ability to affect the policies that it pushes, it cannot assume that that capacity will be there in the future. It has to consider very strongly how it recruits, retains, and develops its employees going into the future. And that this is a key issue for the state going forward. It is part of the reason why we are bringing you the contracts that we have here today. But we will get to that later. Right now, I want to walk through the workforce report of 2011 and some of the tables in it. On page 5 rather, you'll see just some of the key findings. Thank you. Some of the key findings. There are demographic information, including that annual retirements doubled from 2010 to 2011. And an anecdote that we were experiencing in 2011, we were finding out that basically we were having more retirements in the first half of the year than any year we had previous to that. The changes in the demographics that we've been anticipating, everyone's age, is happening. And it's not a leading indicator, it's a lagging indicator. The changes are already well underway, and it's happening all the time. Approximately 35% of our workforce is between 50 and 60 years old. So that represents a tremendous amount of accumulated experience, skills in the state workforce that is nearing the end of their careers. Beyond that, point number 3 on the key findings is that the state workforce is actually shrinking. The number of state employees decreased by 4% compared to 2011. And that each of the last 3 years, the workforce has declined. What we're seeing is a change in the composition of the workforce, a change in the types of work that the state workforce is expected to handle. And while the net figure is relatively constant and somewhat declining, what you're seeing is a recalibration of the work that is expected from state agencies. With that, I'm sure we'll talk more about it, but going to finding number 6, is the total cost of compensation for the state has actually not changed significantly over the past 3 years. It's been relatively constant. Because of the recalibration and the change in mix in some of the activities that we do, because of some of the increases in compensation such as health care, those costs of compensation have been relatively constant. It is not a major driver of the state budget issues that we have been experiencing in recent years from the macro budget perspective, but it is an important consideration going forward. So there are a number of different features and I think findings that you see there on page 1. I want to just alert you to page 7. Gives you just a nice breakdown of some of the facts and figures of the state workforce as of 2010. You'll see again that there's about 34,000 people in the state workforce, depending on which year you're looking at, and the median age. Breakdown by ethnicity, gender. One thing that I think is not commonly understood is that, as we reported earlier in the year, while veterans compose about 5% of the state workforce, there are 9 to 10% of the executive branch workforce. The average length of service over 12 years for state employees, and that there's a constant churning because there are hires going on every year, even when we are trying to, in prior years, under relative freezes of state employees. The places where those employees work is shown on page 8. You'll see a breakdown of the executive branch of government. Most are the executive branch. There's also trend lines to the judicial, legislature, and retirement agencies showing the total compensation of state employees of the state. On page 9, the executive branch workforce size is shown. You'll see some annual variation. Again, that changes due to budget pressures, changes in institutional care and types of institutions, because that's where many of the employees of the state work. As you'll see on the next page, major employers of this, major agencies, the most employees are shown on page 10. Department of Human Services and their state operating services, MSLP, the sex offender program, have a significant portion of the state employees and are the largest employer as an agency. MNDOT almost entirely run out of the non-general fund, out of the trunk highway fund and other funds, about 14% of the state employees, and corrections at 13%. A lot of the direct services are where many of our employees are at, yet many of the other services and many of the other activities that committees deal with on a day-to-day basis are handled by other agencies that have a smaller portion of the overall workforce. Total counts and by appointments are shown on page 11. I'm not going to walk you through the entire report in the interest of time, but I will point out on page 13, just for the executive branch and net workforce reductions, that in recent years, as we've talked in committee during session and in this committee, that there have been reductions in the number of FTE due to a number of different factors, changing and including retirements for some of the lead agencies here, changes in the composition of the workforce where we're contracting out for different types of services or not providing them directly, as well as just simply due to budget pressures, constraints on the number of FTEs within an agency's budget. You'll see some of the most recent data on page 13.
Commissioner, if I could ask on this, the net workforce reduction, I didn't hear you make any comment that any of these reductions had anything to do with technology changes, new programs that obviously would be able to reduce the workload by FTEs. Is that part of that as well?
Oh, absolutely, Mr. Chair. The changes in technology and the things that are expected of employees is a constant driver. It's not a new phenomenon, it's just a constant driver of how you run a business. And the businesses take governments changing all the time. Indeed, one of our major employers has changed significantly the components of its activities due to technology changes in the UI system and other places. The Department of Human Services, Department of Corrections, even in just building new buildings and the types of security systems that they're able to put in there have affected their workforce and how they're doing it. More recently, changes in how we deliver technology services is starting to have impact on how we allocate FTEs in the IT series. So yeah, technology and programmatic changes are all over. Some of the drivers of new employees are also related to programmatic changes. Whether the legacy funds, new employees in some of those dedicated funds, or more significantly, the number of auditors in the Department of Revenue. Been one of the largest growth areas over this period of time as we continue to add staff to tax collections. Beyond that, Department of Corrections has also been adding staff as our prison counts change. So programmatic expectations along with technology changes, yes, that's part of the drivers.
Thank you. Questions for the Commissioner, Representative Downey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Showalter, I looked at the 2010 workforce report quite a lot during the session the last 2 years, and just had some things in my head from that. And as I looked at the 2011 report, one of the things I observed is that you only present the appointment counts in the 2011 report. Back in 2010, you showed the FTE and appointment count numbers kind of side by side so we could see the difference. Can you explain very briefly the difference between appointment counts and FTEs? And if you think that appointment counts is a better reflection of the workforce for us to consider, and why the FTE counts weren't included in the 2011 report?
Commissioner Showalter.
Mr. Chair, our representative, a great question, something that the department has internal conversations on that all the time. The difference between FTEs and appointment counts is pretty simple. Appointments is a person, a head. A head count is another way of thinking about it. Somebody is associated with an appointment. They may be a temporary appointment for a month. They may be a part-time worker only working a quarter time or half-time, but they are counted as they should be, a person, an appointment working for the state. An FTE is a totally different metric. Basically, it's full-time equivalent. It's somebody who's working the standard number of hours during a week. So somebody who's working, 2 people who are working part-time may still not equal the number of hours that a full-time employee is working. Appointment count would say you have 2 people if you have 2 part-timers and only 1 appointment working full-time. FTE count would say it's the balance is more on the FTE. So there are two different ways of looking at it. As we have more part-time employees, that appointment count is interesting because more agencies are using professional contracts through the pro appointments or former state employees coming back working part-time. It's an interesting piece of information. From my perspective, if you're gauging effort, the amount of hours that are worked, I think the FTE count is what you really need to be focusing on more often than not, because that takes into account overtime. It takes into account just the total number of hours worked by state employees. As far as why it's not in this report, I'm not entirely sure. Certainly, we show both pieces of information, and the FTE account was issued in a separate report.
Representative Downey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioner. I appreciate that, and I actually agree with you. I've always looked at it from an FTE perspective in terms of thinking about our overall productivity and those kinds of things. And I think the appointment count oftentimes is just a reflection of the variables of hiring and whether you had part-time, folks showing up for a period of time. And so you made some comments about the declining workforce, but that was all, I think, with regard to the appointment counts. And so in my mind, the FTE counts is a more relevant number. So I went back and looked real quick at the report from last year. And so I think I got this right, but in the last few years, the FTE count went up in 2008 from 32,400 to 32,500 in 2009, and then it went up to 32,700 in 2010, and then started to go back down, and this is where I think you're talking about some of the overall declines in the state workforce. It went down to 32,300 in 2011, and now in your projection on your worksheet here, it's going down to 31,500. So over the last 2 years, we've seen a decrease in about 11 or 1,200 FTEs. And I know maybe you're going to get into this further, but one of the questions that I had was when we talked about the compensation, total compensation remaining flat. Is it fair then, with that slight decline in FTEs over the last couple of years, that somehow, per person compensation has been growing along the way? Otherwise, we wouldn't have flat total compensation with the declining number of people. Is that a fair generalization?
Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, Representative, that's a fair characterization. I think there's two factors behind it. One is that the cost of employment for the same FTE is going up over that period of time, not significantly, but because of healthcare cost increases, even with 0% ATPs, those healthcare costs do rise over time. Separately, and I think just as important, is changes in the composition of the workforce. That the people who are leaving and the positions that are being dropped out of state government aren't the same ones that are being hired in to keep that total complement constant. In general, I think what we're seeing is a substitution effect with more employees coming in at higher pay rates than those who are being dropped. Even if you look at the two contracts before you, you're going to see differences in the trend between the MAPE and the AFSCME contracts and relative differences between those two unions. That is happening all the time. It's not a new factor, but it is certainly a driving element behind the compensation numbers of the state.
Representative Dowling.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't need to belabor this. We can have some of this conversation offline, but it's relative to how we're repositioning the workforce for the future and whether we're just creating another age demographic bubble that's going to move through the existing system, much the same way that the bubble that's moving into retirement now is causing us some challenges. You mentioned last time that the cost of retirements might have also played into the fact that we aren't seeing total compensation costs drop, even though the FTE count has a bit here the last couple of years. Can you explain that and what those retirement costs are and how they kind of materialize in our yearly budget?
I'll start. Mr. Chair, Representative, I'm hoping to on this as we go along. But yes, the retirement costs, as an employee separates from the state through retirement, they are eligible for their accumulated sick, a portion of their accumulated sick leave and certainly their annual leave. that becomes a lump sum payout that's either paid to a health savings account, and that is an obligation of the state. It is not new, it is not a large sum in the grand scheme of things, but when you have large numbers of retirements happening and agency budgets are tight, it can be an issue from the agency budget perspective, and certainly the total compensation figure. Somebody's take-home pay, the obligation to the state in that year can be significantly higher than their normal salary rate. So it's a long way of saying, yeah, retirements cost the state money for that employee who's leaving, and then obviously you're going to have additional costs as you either double fill or as you try to get people coming in the future. If you'd like the specifics about what is an employee gets as a retiree, we should talk about that if necessary.
Representative Downey.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and this will be my last question, and we can move on to, so do you know for the 1,600 folks who retired in this latest year that you're reporting here, do you know what the total cost of those retirement payouts was, or do you have a kind of a rough per employee or per retiree number to understand what that cost actually is? I mean, that cost will actually go away over time as hopefully the retirement starts to reduce. So I think it's helpful for us to understand what the cost of retirements is in a given year, maybe particularly this year.
Mr. Chair, I don't have that figure, and I be corrected that the severance costs are certainly part of the state expenditures, but they're not included in the compensation figures that you're seeing in front of you. So the compensation figures that you have there don't include that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It would be interesting for me personally just to see the cost of retirements for those 1,600. If you can come up with that, that would be great.
Certainly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Further questions of the Commissioner? Representative Woodland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Showalter, you mentioned a couple of times the changing nature of the workforce and how it's evolving. The implication in one of your answers to Representative Downey was that the people who are being hired to higher skill or higher education level jobs or something. That was the implication, I guess, but I wonder if you could provide a little more background information about how the workforce, the state government workforce is changing in terms of the positions that are being hired into and the work they're being asked to do.
Commissioner Showalter.
Mr. Chair, Representative, excellent question. It really, the state is a $60 billion enterprise. $62 billion biennial spend of the state. Less than 10% of that in the general fund is really associated with compensation. The people are more and more managing programs in which the money is going out to other projects. Ultimately, we are doing less and less direct services and doing more and more funding of healthcare organizations, hospitals, community services, school districts, and so forth. So the state budget is a number of different activities, and a lot of the work is knowledge. A lot of it is managing information, managing processes and programs, and then we expect all our employees to be part of that at all levels of the scale. So managing, making sure we have the right experiences. They know something about caring for veterans in a veterans home in a very particular work environment, whether it is managing a healthcare program through the Department of Human Services, which is one of the largest payers of healthcare in the state, or managing large IT systems. And we have some specialized and I think highly technical needs in the state. We've enjoyed long-term service from a lot of state employees in the past. What I think our workforce issue is whether we can continue to assume that people will have 10, 15, 25-year careers in the state, accumulating experience and continuing to dedicate that to the state, or whether as they accumulate that experience, they'll find other opportunities to come elsewhere.
Representative Winkler.
Mr. Chair, one follow-up. Commissioner Showalter, it occurs to me that when you mention longevity, that it could be that it's difficult for employees to get experience doing the particular kinds of work that we ask state government employees to do in the private sector. That it isn't, there isn't an easy equivalent for a lot of the services that we provide in the state that go in the private sector. And I guess the question is, how easy is it to transition people to and from state employment and bring them on board at the state and get them up to speed on what kind of work they'll be doing? I mean, can you kind of, can you just sort of, plug somebody in who has 15 years experience in the private sector and put them directly into city service, and they'll be expected to be up to speed in a couple of weeks, or is there a longer lag time? To what extent, I guess this ultimately gets to, is to what extent does experience working for the state actually provide a value that is hard to get anyway, in any other way?
Commissioner Showalter.
Mr. Chair, Representative, I think it's a significant and probably growing factor for state employees to have experience in the state programs because of the interdependencies of those programs and because of the expectations that we have. Interdependencies between federal government requirements and state law, because of the specific governing nature of being in the public sector and changes in the program structure and the budget on an annual and biennial basis. And because we have very specific service lines that don't typically have public sector equivalents, or private sector equivalents. There are some areas that they do, but there are many others where they're unique. As a result, examples of where there are some overlap, some of our direct care facilities are competing with private entities or nonprofit entities for those very same workers or for the managers of those workers. And people in our facilities oftentimes have different issues, have different experiences and may not have been, could not have been cared for in private setting. So the experience and the skill sets necessary.
Representative Whitler. Yeah, final comment, Mr. Chair. It seems to me that there are people who say that government shouldn't provide services that you can find in yellow pages. The government shouldn't be competing with private sector service providers. And it seems to me if you're going to follow that line of argument, I'm not sure. Somebody's phone is here. If you're going to follow that line of argument, then you're going to have more people in state employment who have unique qualifications or have unique job descriptions that are different from what they find in the private sector. And in a case like that, it seems to me that length of service in state government is a real value, because as we evolve towards government providing services that the private sector can't provide, we're going to have to, I think, find ways of compensating and rewarding people for their length of service. And obviously, you're interested in pay for performance, but in some cases, we're just going to have to find ways to keep people on board who've been in state government for some time, because their value is that experience. It's hard to replicate in any other way. It seems we're going to be moving more and more in that direction.
Thank you. Further questions for the President? Representative Benson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Showalter, I remember during the last section, there were a number of bills that were offered by members even of this committee that reform employment and state workers. I also remember testimony of the fact that studies have indicated that in terms of pay for particular positions within the executive branch, that some are overpaid, maybe some of the jobs that are at the lower levels of scale, and then underpaid in some of the higher levels. I can also remember the testimony, an awful lot of sympathy in terms of trying to hire the best qualified people for some of those. I'll just throw that out. For lawyers, for example. And you began your briefing this morning with the importance of this contract and how that would help to recruit, employ, and retain. But I don't see any evidence that in this contract that we get to the issue of properly compensating by the work that's being done. I'd like for you to maybe address the committee in terms of how do we attract the best and brightest at those highest levels, if indeed all we've done is more or less the same thing that we've always done in terms of a contract.
Commissioner Showalter.
Mr. Chair, our representative, appreciate the question. I think what's really at heart of the issue is tone between the state as an employer and its employees. Whether we show the respect and interest in the workforce continuing the conversation with the unions, with the employees in general, towards making the state a competitive employer, a productive employer, an innovative employer. I don't think that it's a one-and-done situation. This is a process that we are underway, and I think will continue for a long time to come. I think right now, what is at stake is making sure that we respect the collective bargaining process, that we strike a fair deal for the employees in this biennium, and strike a fair deal for taxpayers. And I think that's what we're trying to go for.
Representative Benson.
Would it be fair to say, though, Commissioner, that a different outcome may have been better in terms of the recruiting process at the higher end?
Commissioner Showalter.
Mr. Chair, Representative, there's, as the report would suggest, and as you mentioned in your comments, there's a number of different sort of groups and strata within the state workforce. Now, these contracts are only a portion of the state workforce. There's a number of other issues, a number of other contracts that still could come to you that might more directly affect what you're talking about. Beyond that, there's statutory restrictions on the levels of pay, things like that, that are very real constraints for a number of professional areas.
I need to beat a dead horse, but would a different outcome, could that have affected positively? I got an answer, but a yes or no in terms of whether or not you thought a different outcome in the contract negotiations would have aided you in many of the executive level jobs that we seem to underpay. I kind of get into Representative Winkler's line of question a little bit in terms of attracting the best and the brightest.
Commissioner Showalter.
Mr. Chair, Representative, I'm trying to get to a yes or no, and I'm having a hard time doing it. If you're talking about higher salaried employees, most of those are not covered by these contracts. So I don't know that these contracts necessarily resolve the questions we're trying to address. And the statutory changes that aren't part of the bargaining process that could be addressed in any contract that we bring forward. So are these hard-fought negotiations that we're bringing forward, in which case the executive branch and the unions neither felt like they got everything they wanted? Absolutely. But that's what we're bringing forward, something that we worked on together to try to resolve our differences.
All right. Thank you very much. Let's move on to the overview of the full-time equivalence report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The second report is something that you can find on the department's website. It was issued in July. And basically talks about the FTE of the state. As from earlier conversation with questions from Representative Downey, you'll see in that that the trends of the FTE are similar to the appointment counts. That overall, in 2012, the FTE count was down by 701, or about 2.2% compared to FY11. That's after adjusting for the impact of the shutdown. So there are clearly more than 2 weeks of that state employees were not on the job. If you didn't take that factor into account, the FTE count in FY12 was down about 1,500, or about 4.7%. So that's actually the reality that most employees live through. From an analytical standpoint, the hours worked during the hours that the state was open, FTE counts were down about 2%. General fund during that period was down about 11%. During the longer term, about 2003 to 2012, we're seeing a decrease in the number of general fund FTE, a slight increase in compensating increase in non-general fund FTE. On net, we're losing about 900 in FTE during the 2003 to 2012 period. As mentioned earlier, that is a number of factors, programmatic impacts, where we are increasing in a few departments, Department of Revenue, Department of Corrections, decreasing in a number of different areas. Most state agencies are in fact decreasing the number of FTE. Again, rebalancing, changing the composition of our workforce. I don't know that there's too many more points in this report that we didn't cover in the previous report, Mr. Chair, but I'd be happy to go in more detail if you would like.
Questions for the Commissioner on the FTE report?
Commissioner, is there a set time period that you count FTEs for the report, and is that consistent year in and year out?
Mr. Chair, fiscal year, we also try to do it year over year, so when you look at our data, we try to take into account seasonality. There's a number of people working for the state who, what agency they work for, changes depending on what month you're talking about. March and April, you'll see a swelling in Department of Revenue employees, we have seasonal tax people. In the summer, you'll see DNR, foresters, accounts going up. So, we try to take that into account by comparing year over year. We do it on a quarterly basis. This report was on an annual basis.
So on the FTE report, the FTE, you could have 2 or 3 bodies make up 1 FTE. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Further questions? All right. Well, thank you very much for that. Let's move on to number 4. Take a look at the contract. I don't believe that we're going to ask Ms. Holmes to give us an overview of the contract, if we could.
And you're asking for essentially a somewhat of a detailed overview of the contract. The first agreement that is before you is the agreement that was reached with ASME Council 5, which represents a number of different bargaining units. The bargaining units that ASME Council 5 represents are the craft maintenance and labor unit. And some examples of the classifications that are in those groups include people like auto mechanics, carpenters, electricians, general repair workers, heavy equipment mechanic, machinists, plumbers. And there are a little over 2,000 of those employees in that particular bargaining unit. The next bargaining unit is known as the service unit. Examples of classifications in that unit include campus security officers, cooks, general maintenance workers, groundskeepers, general laborers, security guards, and there are about 1,800 in that particular unit. It includes classifications like accounting clerk, customer service specialist, healthcare claims examiners, and office and administrative specialists. The last bargaining unit that this particular proposed contract covers is the technical unit. There are over 3,000 employees in that particular unit, including airfield firefighters, dairy inspectors, dental hygienists, engineering aides, rings inspectors, medical laboratory specialists, natural resource mine inspectors, pharmacy technicians. So I think that gives you a little bit better of an idea of the type of work that these employees are doing. If we go to look at the actual changes in the agreement, we made several minor changes in the vacation article to clarify a number of issues relating to when we have movement sometimes from the judicial branch to the executive branch or the legislative branch to the executive branch, and we like to let employees who move across branches carry their vacation and sick leave. Or if an executive branch employee comes over to the legislative branch, they'll carry their sick or annual leave. And we needed to just clarify some of the language that was causing some confusion about when that happens. We also added language that allows the severance payments that we've been talking about before to be put in a healthcare savings plan instead of just be given to an employee in cash. There are obviously a number of benefits for doing that. Obviously, this money is something that the people who have these accounts have to spend on certain types of medical expenses, and so that's a way to sort of channel that into some of the needs that they're going to have after employment. It also is a great benefit for the employer because that is tax-free money, and so we also don't have to pay a tax on that. The employer doesn't have to pay a tax on that particular money. We made a change in the article regarding leave of absence. There was a change in law that specifically allows employees to have time off to vote for their state representatives and senators, and so we had to modify our labor contracts to make clear that was allowable as a paid leave of absence to go vote for those individuals. We made some minor changes to the discipline and disciplinary article. The discipline and discharge article, the change that we made was when we discipline someone and that letter of discipline is put into their personnel file and the contract specifies how long that discipline stays in the file. So the idea is that after a couple of years, that is pulled from the file if there's no further discipline. And we sort of made a swap so that we will remove oral discipline letters quicker, but those particular forms of discipline cannot be taken to arbitration. Previously they could, so that was a trade-off. I think you're familiar with the particular changes that we made in the wage article in terms of the second-year wage adjustment of 2% in the last 6 months of that second year. The insurance changes, we made numerous changes that increased the amount that employees pay when they make office visits, or their co-insurance amounts, or their deductible amounts. And those are the major changes in the ASME contract. So I assume you would like to hear the changes in the MAPE contract, a similar summary, or am I getting too detailed? Okay. Carolyn Travis is the assistant state negotiator, and she was the chief negotiator for the MAPE contract, so I'm going to let her come up and tell you about the changes in the MAPE contract.
Welcome to the committee. Please state your name and you may proceed.
I'm Carolyn Travis. I'm the assistant state negotiator for MMD, and I negotiated the MAPE contract. And many of the changes that were summarized by Ms. Holmes regarding the ASME contract were also placed into the MAPE contract, particularly some of the language that we agreed to clarifying the vacation article so that employees can move from the legislative and judicial branch to executive branch and continue to carry forward their vacation and sick leave. We similarly put in the change regarding voting time to comply with statutory changes. We removed some obsolete language from the contract and also some language in the layoff article to clarify some leave when people are laid off, claim a job in state government, and have a period of time to transition to that new job. In the vacation article, we also agreed with the MAPE bargaining unit to extend vacation credit for public sector employees who come to work at the state. We have found that in many of our professional level positions, there's
Excuse me, Mr. First of all, let me apologize for my dress today. I just had my eyes, surgery on my eyes, and the doctor said show up in relaxed clothing, so that's why I'm looking like this. But I guess I'm wondering why we're going through this exercise. It just seems to me, and I could be wrong, that a lot of minds are already made up. If I'm wrong, I want to hear that, but I mean, we've heard this stuff before. We're going to hear it again. If the vote is 6-4, do we need to continue? So That's my question.
Thank you, Senator Menson. I'm not sitting here assuming anything about the minds of the people at this committee table. So that's why we're going to go through this report. And,
Well, I just, excuse me, again, it's hard to see you. That's fine. But I can see you, but that's, you know, I do have to take, but I'm here, I thought it was important enough to show up and listen to it. But again, it's, you know, the guy says, don't confuse me with the facts, my mind's already made up. You know, so that's kind of where I'm coming from. So I'll sit here and listen and be a good boy.
thank you. Please continue.
Great, thank you. The only other change I wanted to highlight for the committee was the change in the vacation article. As Commissioner Showalter indicated earlier, we are finding that it is harder and harder to recruit for some of our professional level positions, which the contract covers. And in order to increase our ability to recruit the job skills that we need, we did expand the vacation article so that if you have a public sector employee who's coming from, example, Hennepin County, Dakota County, and they work there within 4 years of the time that they're coming to the state, that the agency may, and it is a may give them credit for their time with that previous public sector employer, which may make it a little more easy to recruit those skills that we need for the jobs that we have for the state. The wage article and the insurance article changes are identical to those made in the AFSCME agreement. I have nothing further.
All right, thank you. Any questions from the committee? Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Holmes, there was some information that we received, some of us received from you. The cost of these contracts for 14 and 15, kind of understanding what they may mean in terms of projections. The 2% increase in the contract proposal, even though it only lands in the last 6 months of this contract, would, as I understand it, as you know, I wrote a bill last year to get us out of this recurring autopilot increase that I think puts the state at a significant negotiating disadvantage. As I understand it, then, what we would, if we approve this contract, these contracts, we would be really setting up the next situation a couple of years from now, if we would have a similar discussion, that we would have potentially a 2% autopilot increase for each of the 2 years of the biennium, fully for each of those 2 years, so 2% the first year and 2% the second year. Is that accurate?
Ms. Holmes.
Mr. Chair, Representative Drazkowski, if what you're saying is, if we don't have contracts negotiated by the time this one expires, and we operate under the statute that says the terms continue in effect, the 2% increase is date specific and wouldn't necessarily carry over. That's a decision we'll have. But if what you're saying is there an impact in the next biennium in terms of costs that isn't shown in the cost in this biennium? Yes, and I think that's what you're getting at, the fact that there are tails.
Ms. Holmes, it is, but I'm curious specifically, Ms. Holmes, you remember we were having a discussion here 18 months ago or something like that about how this is all going to work and what is the governor's interpretation of the then existing contract that expired on June 30th of 11. What is the interpretation of that going forward on these autopilot provisions that we have in statute, realizing that there were step increases in 1 year of the biennium and not in the other year. So the executive branch made an interpretation at that point, and that's the interpretation we are working under. I'm wondering what is the executive branch's interpretation right now? Should we adopt this contract is what you've said to me, that the executive branch's interpretation would be that there would only be a 2% somehow prorated increase for 1/4 of the contract period or something? I didn't quite understand. Or would it be construed to be a 2% for the entire year?
Ms. Holmes?
Mr. Chair, Representative Drazkowski, the way that the 2% increase is written is that it goes into effect on a specific date, January 2nd, 2013. That's the beginning of a pay period. That's why it's January 2nd. Because it's date specific, that doesn't mean that automatically the next year an increase of 2% would be in effect if we didn't have the contracts negotiated. So the across the board needs to be negotiated each time. The step increases, they do automatically occur each year unless we negotiate to stop them.
Thank you, Representative Drazkowski. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Ms. Holmes. The oral reprimand, I was kind of confused. Why would we, I mean, if we've got data on past behavior of particular employees, why would it be in the executive branch's interest to remove that from the file? Why wouldn't you keep that indefinitely?
Mr. Chair, Representative Drazkowski, the philosophy of discipline that has been in place in these labor contracts since their very beginning is called progressive discipline. And the idea is that you start at a lower end of a disciplinary level, whether it's an oral, a written, or a short suspension, for the first time an employee makes a mistake. Now that's a little bit oversimplistic because what the mistake is certainly impacts the level of discipline. But the idea is once you give that, if it corrects behavior, and if you don't have any other discipline in the next several years, you remove that discipline from the file so that it isn't a permanent blemish on the employee's record forever. Now, we still do keep, there are time limits for all of the disciplinary levels in terms of staying in the personnel file.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks again, Ms. Holmes. Lastly, I'd like to talk to you more about that offline, but lastly, I remember reading that there is a provision in the proposed contract, and maybe it's one that's carried over from the existing contract, that the state government are covering grandchildren in their health care benefits. Is that true, and could you tell us more about that?
Ms. Holmes.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Drazkowski, if the grandchildren are in the legal custody, and there are different ways to obtain legal custody of a state employee, if the state employee is acting as the parent, and that's legally, then they can be covered as a dependent. That doesn't mean everybody's grandchildren.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's such an easement. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Further questions?
Mr. Chair, if I could just follow up. Representative Drazkowski. One of the documents you sent out, and I completely understand the dependent grandchildren. I have a number of friends who have taken custody of their grandchildren, and they are legally responsible. But there's also a provision for the grandchildren of unmarried, the children of unmarried children. How did that come to be?
Ms. Holmes.
This is a situation where you have a very young parent who is still a legal dependent of their parent who has a child.
Okay, so if I may clarify, so the child of the state employee is still legally dependent. Okay, so it's not just unmarried children. I just want to clarify so we don't go off on that. Thank you.
Further questions? Representative Whitmer.
Well, Mr. Chair, we've had 2 meetings and we've had a long time to discuss this. This is a modest contract, and we had some bipartisan agreement in the last hearing that this was a modest contract. Some of the changes that Republicans would like to see weren't made, but given the fact that we had a state government shutdown, that people lost $65 million in wages in the last biennium, that we've had no raises for some time, the kind of reforms that you're seeking to make, time-paid performance and so forth, I think would take more time, even though I think they have some merit. I don't think that this contract is the way to do it. So given that this is a very modest contract, we've had ample time to consider it, we've had ample committee time to review it, we've spent ample taxpayer dollars in per diem and other things and expenses to review this. Mr. Chair, I would move the SER1 resolution and request a roll call.
Representative Winkler moves the SER1 resolution. Everybody should have a copy of the SER1 and the SER5 resolution. We are doing roll call on the SER1 resolution. Secretary will take the roll.
Senator Perry?
No.
Senator Benson?
No.
Senator Daly? No. Senator Eaton?
Yes.
Senator Benson?
Yes.
Representative Benson?
No.
Representative Downey?
No.
Representative Drazkowski?
No.
Representative Lilly?
Yes.
Representative Winkler?
Yes.
On a 6-4 vote, SER1 failed.
I was right.
Representative Downey? Or, excuse me, Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I would move SER5 into adoption.
Representative Drazkowski moves SER5. Take roll.
Mr. Chair.
Is there not time for discussion?
Representative Lilly.
I was just wondering if the maker of the motion could explain what exactly he's hoping to achieve by SER5.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe it would be helpful to review Representative Lilly. SER5 goes back and actually refers to the fact that these contracts do not incorporate many of the changes that this committee has been urging the administration to look at over the last 2 years, specifically citing the area of insurance and that employees actually pay a portion of their health care premium, similar to what we see in the private sector. That we actually see the new monies brought forward for salary instead of the current step increases, instead of those being applied there or as across the board increases, that they be tied directly to merit, to performance, to a rigorous performance standard or program. So that was what's included in here, and it would disapprove or reject the contract proposals with an inherent understanding or inherent urging of the administration to go back to the table with the exclusive representatives and to bring back for the entertainment of this committee proposals that would include these types of provisions.
Mr. Chair.
Representative Will.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Drazkowski. To Representative Drazkowski's credit, he's one of the members of this committee that has consistently asked these questions, so I got to kind of start there. All along, I really question all along from the beginning of our last meeting. I said, Mr. Chair, why are we using this committee in this way? As a former chair, Senator Metzen repeated kind of the same sort of question. Representative Lanning, when he was chair, never used it this way. Quite honestly, this room is wonderful, although it's wonderful. We've never really met in this room for this committee. We've always kind of met in the basement or often in one of the less nicer rooms, although this is certainly one of the most beautiful rooms in the Capitol, and I just, you know, I think it's unfortunate that we've brought it to this. We've never historically had press conferences or any sort of thing after this committee. Under my hockey buddy, you know, I'd give him a hard time in the locker room, and that was about it. About certain things that he was negotiating, there's respect to these bodies of the House and the Senate, and I just, so I just questioned some of the timing. You know, right before an election, here we are, we're going to take down our employees. You know, in my personal life, I work for one of the biggest employers in Minnesota, and many of us are getting raises. I don't know if you heard that. Many of us are, the business is doing well, and they chose to pass that on to us. There's some profit sharing, and quite honestly, the employees are quite happy about it. They've also paid a price, like our state workers, through the shutdown. We did too in the private sector. We did that, we shared. I'm just disappointed that it's come to this. This committee has never really, you know, we went through, I kind of was quiet through your program here. And, you know, we've used it today, again, to kind of go through what Representative Downey, Representative Benson, and Representative Winkler, and myself have talked about all session in State Gov Finance. Representative Downey, to his credit, has asked those questions over and over of the same folks all session long. So to use this committee is just super unfortunate. And your chair, Mr. Chair, you're chair of the same committee that Representative Downey, Representative Benson, Representative Winkler, and myself are members of in the House. And I would imagine, I'm sorry I didn't watch your meetings, I missed them, but I would imagine you asked the same sort of questions, or certainly with, you got the gavel of the hand, and you were running the place, you had your chance, you could have asked these questions. So I know how this vote's going to go, and you know, like my friend Representative Benson mentioned, you know, I was on city council. We weren't on the count pretty early when you're on city council, but look these folks in the eyes. They're doing good work. When I was first on the city council, I was a little more conservative. I remember, oh yeah, I'm going to find some waste. I'm going to find some stuff. You know what happened is, I got on the city council and I figured out that these people are out plowing our streets while we're sitting inside drinking coffee. They're out keeping us safe when some idiot's doing something out there protecting us. I lost a friend that was shot, police officer. These people, spend time with them. Go take a visit. I know we all can't be everywhere. But go to a correction facility and see what they're dealing with. Go to Stillwater, go to Oak Park Heights, walk with them, walk next to them, see what they're doing. They're not asking for much. This is ridiculous. I'm just, this isn't the time or the place to negotiate these things. Representative Drazkowski has consistently asked questions in this committee, and it is moving the bar a little bit compared to where I first started. And it's been uncomfortable. But at the end of the day, I think, I don't hold that against them. I'm not holding it necessarily against you, but I think what it is, we're not governors. The governor negotiated this contract in good faith. Sometimes I think we need to grow up and just say, we're not the governor. You know, there's things that my hockey buddy Tim Plenty did that I didn't agree with. There's things that our current governor does that I don't totally agree with. But overall, I'm not governor. They won. And I don't know how you can look these folks in the face and say that 2% is ridiculous. I don't get it. And plus all the other factors. So thank you.
Representative Drazkowski.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I didn't forget to mention one element, Mr. Chair, of SER 5, but before I do that, I would just like to remind folks, at least as I look at the numbers and the numbers that have been presented to me, the impact on this is about a 7 or 9% increase across the biennium. When you add them together, it's significant. It's rather significant in terms of the budget. I would just point out also on SER 5, item number 3, we have come to understand that while we're in this process and while the administration and the exclusive representatives have come forward asking for these increases, at the very same time, we understand at least one of the unions is submitting its membership to a proposed dues increase. I understand, Mr. Chair, that dues increase would amount to about $1.9 million. A large portion of these dollars would be used to increase the amount of money that the particular union, the MAPE union, would take in order to fund its operations. Mr. Chair, I would like to see, in the event we are able to approve a contract that the administration will come forward with, in the event we're able to do that, I would like to see those dollars go not to the union, but to the state workers who work hard on behalf of Minnesotans. And that's why I'm doing the
Thank you. Secretary will take the roll.
Mr. Chair.
Secretary will take the roll.
Apparently you're not interested in any further questions. Mr. Chairman, you'd like to shut down debate in the Senate?
Secretary will take the roll on SER 5.
Mr. Chair, there's a First Amendment. We're supposed to be representing the public. I had my hand up, you saw me, and you chose to ignore it.
Senator Benson?
Yes.
Senator Daly? Senator Eaton? No. Senator Metzen?
No.
Representative Benson?
Yes.
Representative Downey?
Yes.
Representative Drazkowski?
Yes.
Representative Lilly?
No.
Representative Winkler?
No.
Representative Winkler, no?
SER 5 prevails with a 6-4 vote. With that, this meeting is adjourned.
Good night.
They way overstepped their bounds. The legislature does not have a budget. They've tried to pass, you've heard it all said, two years now, trying to change the bargaining process in the state, got no traction, so they choose to use this theater that we just set up to voice those kinds of positions which are totally offensive. You know, I'm going to say this, and I'm going to steal Elliot's. I am truly going to say this. I'm glad they finally voted and we got through this theater that we've been going through. Nobody doubted what the outcome was going to be. Nobody doubted that the vote was going to be any different than it was. But to do what they did today is nothing more than political theater, trying to get their names in the paper again. And I'm damn glad Harry got his last per diem. He deserves no more. As a boy, I said this last time, in 40 years, I have never witnessed an abuse of the power of the chair. As we saw this at the last action here, to refuse to recognize a sitting member of the committee, to ignore them, and I've had the opportunity, and I consider it a real opportunity, to testify in Congress, testify in 40-plus states before their legislative bodies. Not once have I ever seen this type of abuse, absolute outright fabrication of the truth. Drazkowski, Perry, Downey need to go back and understand the word truth, because their truth is lies. They lie. And they're trying to create a situation in this state that makes enemies out of the hardworking men and women who do the work for the state, who do the work for Minskew, who keep government functioning. They need to apologize to every state worker, every Minskew employee for the lies that came out of their mouth today.
Go ahead, Jim.
That's all. If I go any farther, I'm going to be in trouble.
Once again, the leadership of the Republican Party in this state has denigrated and dismissed state workers. State workers lost $65 million in wages in the shutdown caused by the leadership of the House and the Senate last year. AFSCME members make on average $38,000 a year. And all the state employees in this state, MAPE and AFSCME and everyone else, we are the 7th leanest workforce in the nation. And we produce the best public services in the nation, as every Minnesotan will attest to. No state worker gets a free ride on health insurance. In 2012, the average state worker, when they used their health insurance, paid $814 a year. In 2011, pardon me. And for 2012, that number would be $958. That doesn't include dependents coverage, doesn't include the premium copays. It does not include, for those who get the sickest, they will pay as much as $1,900 single, $3,800 family. And what's more, the myth that the private sector employees have not been getting wages increases is simply that, a myth. We have here a report, survey, pay to rise for Minnesota workers by 2.9% according to the Altura Consulting Group. That was produced in the Finance and Commerce paper, The Cost of Doing Business. So private sector workers are getting a 2.9% increase. They got one last year. State employees haven't seen a wage increase in 3.5 years, while the cost of gas and oil and everything else has gone up. State employees work extremely hard to produce the best services possible, and they deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. What the leadership of this committee wants Minnesotans to believe is that there's some difference between private sector and public sector workers. In fact, there is no difference. Every worker, private or public, deserves a fair wage. Every worker, private or public, deserves health care that can take care of their family. Every worker, private or public, deserves to be able to retire in dignity, not poverty. And they should not be treated with the denigration and disrespect that was done by the chairman and the leadership of this committee. It was simply wrong. Folks, we also have some people who are here, state employees, who really would like to chat with you just a bit, so you can understand the impact of this on them and the kind of work that they do for Minnesota. Steve Aldrin, where's Steve?
Before you do that, can I just ask?
Yeah.
What does this decision mean? I mean, do they have the authority to?
Means that the contract we just negotiated and that we spent 14 months doing does not go into effect. It means that the $8 million in health care savings that we negotiated with the state will not go into effect. The state will not save that $8 million if this contract does not go into effect. It means that we will have to wait till the next legislative session to see if there will be a contract or not.
But you could.
We will continue on with the current agreement.
This contract.
Yes.
Yes. Yes, it could.
And in the meantime, the current agreement remains in effect.
As far as we know, and the executive branch and us will continue the contract in effect. I don't have a reason to believe otherwise.
If the legislature does not approve this contract in 13, are we simply going to run out the clock on this biennium and we'll be negotiating next for the contract for the following biennium?
We'll still have to negotiate something for this biennium and something for the next biennium. It's an unprecedented situation, Lori. We've never been in it before. Never, not even close.
So the notion that we would just simply take a buy on this biennium, that's not possible. You will still have an obligation if there's no action by the new legislature. Is something about this biennium?
We'll have to talk to it's a negotiations, and we'll have to talk to, it's a collective bargaining situation. We'd have to talk to the executive.
Yeah, it creates a really unique situation that we've been looking at. I personally do not believe, Lori, it's why we're going to change the legislature.
Does their recommendation to go back to the bargaining table carry any force?
They have to get over the fact that Representative Lilly was correct. They did not win the governor's race. They don't own an office. The Public Employee Labor Relations Act, which has been public policy in this state since 1972, is clear. We negotiate with the executive branch. It is voted up or down by this commission and then by the legislature. That has been the public policy of this state since 1972. As Governor Dayton pointed out in a letter to the committee, when Governor Pawlenty negotiated previous contracts with MAPE and AFSCME and all the other bargaining units, none of these concerns were raised by any of these people. Not once. Not in all the years. We negotiate with the governor if it's a Democrat or if it's a Republican. We do not negotiate with the legislature if it's Democrat or Republican. We negotiate with the executive branch. It is the role of the legislature to vote a contract up or down, not to amend it, not to put all this political ploy into it. Jim is absolutely correct. I'd like to introduce to you Steve Waldron, who works up at DOT up in Duluth. He's a member of Local 695, and he's one of the people who help save lives and make emergency repairs after the floods, because when there's an emergency, the first people who are on the scene are public workers. Steve.
So you up there, we work, you know, get the call in the middle of the night, whenever it is, we're out there. We drop whatever we're doing. We end up, a lot of times we leave our families to deal with anything that's going on home. The floods, there are several of them that left their families to deal with the floods while they went out and helped the public. They kept, you know, closed off roads if the bridges weren't safe, inspected the roads, opened the roads back up as soon as we could, did whatever repairs we needed to them.
Thank you, Steve. We have Jenny Foster from the Department of Revenue, who's got children that she has to provide health care for.
They like to say that we don't pay anything for our health care. I have a daughter who has type 1 diabetes. At this point already this year, I've already spent over $4,000 in health care. And we have 4 months left to go in the year. So their lies about saying that we're getting a free ride with health care doesn't exist. I'm here to tell you that we actually do pay out of pocket. And, you know, without getting the raise, when am I going to have to decide to spend $150 to $200 a month in diabetic supplies to pay my electric bill? I shouldn't have to make that choice.
Thank you, Jenny. We have Rod Morozic from DOT in St. Cloud, who saw that his wife and his family lose their health insurance recently.
Because of an audit, I lost health care to my quintuplets plus one, and I'm a hardworking citizen, and I'm not ripping anybody off. And I can't get answers, so I'm just looking for answers with the audit, why we can't get any answers from legislators trying to help, but MMB, nobody just wants to work with me. And I need health care for my family. I think it's quite important.
We filed agreements to that effect. Senator Perry said he would try to help fix it. He created the problem, and now he wants to try to solve the problem he created. Doug Pamidji, who's from DOT Local 221 here in the metro area. Doug?
Hi, here for the insurance. My family, my wife and one of my dependents has been dropped off the insurance with this audit. And I have 7 other dependents on there, and 4 of which are stepchildren, and I can't get an answer why my wife and my biological son has been off of the insurance. And everybody you talk to, you don't get an answer. They tell you to pay the COBRA. That's the answer that I have received, and I've gotten nowhere. And I need the health care. My son takes a prescription every day, and it's very expensive, and I can't afford it the way it is. So.
Again, this is a problem created by this legislature, and now they claim they want to solve it. Connie Andrews is a DNR employee in Grand Rapids. She has some comments to make.
Hi, I work in beautiful Grand Rapids, Minnesota, and the first thing I would have done with my 2% increase is pay my taxes. Surprise, surprise. I do pay taxes. And I also go to the local grocery store and the local foods, the shoe store and the hardware store, all of those small businesses that these Republicans say they support. They don't support. Support is giving me my raise so I can go support them with my dollars so that they don't have to wonder about where their next dollar is coming from. I keep the local businesses going too.
Thanks, Connie. Mike Lindholm does snow removal and highway work here in the metropolitan area. Mike?
Good afternoon. Like you said, Mike Lindholm. I work for the Department of Transportation. I plow your roads, I fix your guardrail. I'm out there patching your potholes. Last summer, a year later, the government they decided to shut us down for 21 days. And they called this a savings of $65 million. Almost a year later, I'm still trying to catch up on my bills, like most state employees, paying their house payment, paying their rent, putting food on the table. And then they're gonna come here with disrespect like this? This is disgusting. Thank you.
Joanne Holton is one of those many Department of Human Service employees, a direct caregiver in the Department of Human Services. Here comes Joanne.
Hi, I work with MSHOP, which is group homes in Minnesota. We take care of the most vulnerable people in Minnesota. My 2%, I planned on paying my taxes. The GOP increased last year, my property taxes. But the part that I think was hardest on me today was listening to how worthless we all really are to the state. And I always wonder, when did I become the problem of Minnesota as a state employee?
Thank you, Joanne. And finally, Victoria Johnson works at the Vets Home and takes care of our veterans on a daily basis. Victoria.
Hi, everybody. I was here the last time and I asked the senator to come to the Veterans Home. Everybody came there the last time, but I didn't see him. So I'm still inviting him again. Come and see what we do. Then if you don't like it, don't give me the 2%. I've got a house payment. I buy gas. I go to the grocery store like everybody else. What he can do again, let him just give our names, all state employees' name, to the gas station, to the grocery store, everywhere we go, like the bank. Like, okay, I'm not giving them 2%, so the market shouldn't go up. We should have special discount at the gas station, special discount at the grocery store. Everywhere we go shopping, then we have discount there because we're state employees. That's a fair deal. Thank you very much.